Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shekalim Daf Yud Zayin contains two Mishnayos. The daf begins with a Mishnah which describes the layout of the Beis Hamikdash and the 13 places in which people were obligated to bow to Hashem in the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara will describe the gates that are involved in those bowings. The Gemara will quote a machlokes on the subject, and then the Gemara will go into a lengthy description of a passage in the Nevuah of Yecheskel where he describes the stream flowing out of the Beis Hamikdash in the times of the third Beis Hamikdash, how it grew and how it went, and the plants that grew along it, and the Gemara will explain the Nevuah at length. The Gemara will also discuss briefly the Churban, destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Then we'll get to the next Mishnah, which discusses the 13 tables that were in the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara will describe them and what their various purposes were. So first of all, the Mishnah begins by saying that there were 13 places in the Beis Hamikdash where we were supposed to bow. Those, according to the Rabbanan, are the 13 places in which there were gates in the Beis Hamikdash. We were supposed to bow at each of the gates. So somebody walking all the way around to all the gates bowed 13 times. The purpose of the bowing was to show the beauty and the spirituality, the holiness and the greatness of the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So what were the gates? So the Mishnah says that there were 4 on the north side, 4 on the south side, 2 on the west side, and 2 in the east side, and they were as follows. On the south side, beginning from west to east, the first gate, the westmost gate, was called Shar Elyon, the upper gate. That's because the hill of the Har HaBayis was highest on that end. The next gate was Shar Hadelek, where wood was brought into the Beis Hamikdash. Then came Shar HaBachoros, which is where the firstborn animals were brought into the Beis Hamikdash on the way to being brought as a carbon. And the fourth one was Shar HaMayim, which the Mishnah explicitly explains was the machlokes. It was either where the water was brought in for the Nisoch HaMayim on Sukkos, the service of pouring water on the Mizbeach, or it was the place where the Navi Yecheskel was referring to a stream that came out of Kodesh HaKadoshim. That stream went out from that gate through the rest of its trip, as the Gemara will describe at length. Now, the gates on the north side, the westmost one was called Shar Yechaniah, because that is where Yechaniah the king left the Beis Hamikdash when Nebuchadnezzar chased him out. The Gemara will describe that procedure. Then the next gate, this is the sixth one, the second from west, on the north side, is called the gate of Karbonos. That is where Karbonos were brought in. The next gate is called Charanoshim. That's where women came into the Azar in order to lean on their Karbonos if they had to bring one, and to do that. And the last one is called Shar Hashir. That is where musical instruments were brought into the Beis Hamikdash for the Leviim. Now, on the last few gates were the Nicanor, Shar HaNicanor. That was on the eastern end. Nicanor the Shar had 2 small doorways on each side so that people could get in to the Azar without having to open the big Shar Nicanor itself. And on the west side, there were 2 gates without names, were rarely used, and therefore they did not have a name specifically describing them. Okay, the Gemara begins. The Gemara says this is all the opinion of Abi Yosef ben Yochanan. This is how he understands it. But according to Chachamim, there were only 7 gates, and the 13 bowings had nothing to do with the gates. The 13 bowings were actually for the 13 holes in the sorig that was fixed. Now, the sorig was a low fencing of some sort, which surrounded the chel. Chel was a raised platform on which the entire Beis Hamikdash stood. The chel was also the border between where Jews and non-Jews were allowed to enter. Non-Jews were not allowed to go further than the chel, and there was a fence exactly at the chel called the sorig. That was the point at which non-Jews were not allowed to pass. The Greeks were not happy about that, so when they took over the Beis Hamikdash, they made 13 holes in those fences. When the Chashmonaim took it back from them and they fixed those 13, then the decree was put into place that anybody who passes those breaches that were fixed needs to bow in those particular spots. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the description of the stream of water. The Navi Yecheskel in Perek Mem Zayin describes at length how a stream of water begins under the Kodesh HaKadoshim, flows out into Yerushalayim, out into the Midbar, out into the streams, the rivers, even further out to the Yam, the oceans, the lakes, and the seas around Eretz Yisrael, and it sweetens them. Trees grow along the side with all kinds of wonderful fruit. It's filled with amazing fish. And very vivid descriptions of Asid Lavoi, the next world. Now, the stream begins in a tiny flow under the Kodesh HaKodashim, and it gets wider and wider as it goes along. So the Gemara quotes the entire section almost and explains it bit by bit. So first of all, it says as follows: says, a spring of live water, meaning fresh spring water, will come out from Yerushalayim. So the Brisa says it's going to come out of Kodesh HaKodashim, from the Kodesh HaKodashim itself until the Parochas, which cover the Kodesh HaKodashim. It's as thin as the antennae of a snail, called a silai or a kilai. From after the Parochas, it gets a little wider. Now it's as big as the antennae of a locust. Past that, until the Mizbeach Hazav. That's until Mizbeach Hazav. From the Parochas until Mizbeach Hazav, it's the thickness of the antennae of a locust. From the Mizbeach Hazav until the Azaros, the end of the Azaros, it gets as big as the thread that you put in when you're weaving the vertical threads that are fixed in the loom. Then those are slightly thicker than that is the horizontal thread that goes back and forth between those. That is how thick it's going to be from the Azara until the Mifton Hamayas, that's the threshold at the entrance to the Azaros. From there, it gets as wide as water flowing out of the neck of a bottle. Okay, what happens after that? So the Gemara describes the Psukim. The Psukim say that Yecheskel was shown all this by a Malach, and the Malach saw the water trickling out from the right side of the Beis Mikdash. He showed it to Yecheskel. Then he measured 1,000 rods, like 1,000 amos, and he made Yecheskel cross the water, and it was up to his ankles. Then he went further. He measured another 1,000 rods, another 1,000 amos, and then there he said cross again. It was up to his knees. 1,000 amos later, he made him cross again, and there it was up to his waist. And then he went further, and from there he measured another 1,000, and this time he couldn't cross. It was too big for him to cross. The river had grown so big that he couldn't get across, and he said that even a gigantic ship would not be able to sail across the river. That's how furious and how forceful the flow was. The Gemara brings a pasuk to support that. The pasuk says, V'tzi adir lo yavirenu, that a mighty vessel will not be able to cross the stream at that point. Why is it so? Because it says, as another pasuk in Yecheskel says, Ki ga'u hamayim mei sachu, because they became so big that they are sachu. So what does a sachu mean? The Gemara says, mi loshot. It's mei sachu. It's too big to be sachu. Sachu means to swim, the Gemara says. Swim, it's the word also could refer to sailing. Swimming and sailing, we use a similar word there. So it's too big to even be able to swim or sail across. Now, just to show that the word sachu really means swimming, the Gemara brings another pasuk. The Gemara brings not a pasuk. Rav Chuna says that in our town we call swimming, we call it sachavana, like from the word sachu. Another support from that comes from a pasuk that says Ufeiras yadav b'kirbi v'kasher yeforis hasocha lischos, and I'll stretch out his hand like a swimmer stretches out his hands to swim. Gemara brings another pshat that sachu doesn't mean to swim, sachu means to talk, and that this is water that's going to be so great that everybody in the world will be talking about it. Now the Gemara goes further, describing the stream and the psukim that are explaining it, that are describing it, and the pasuk says further, this is not the same context of Yecheskel, this is in Zechariah. It says, "V'yemhu yeh makor niftach lebeis David," and that day there will be a spring opened up for the house of David, u'liyosher Yerushalayim, all the way to the citizens of Yerushalayim, lachatos u'lenida. Now, it says it's going to be for chatos and for nida. So the Gemara says that house of David here refers to Har Tzion, near Yerushalayim. It's going to flow to Yerushalayim. Now, and further to the inhabitants of Yerushalayim. So from Har Tzion to Yerushalayim, the Gemara says, it will be chatas ulenida, it will be fitting for the paraduma water and for anida to use for tevilah, which means it's going to be spring water. You have to have spring water in order to use it as a chatas. It's what's called meimayon. It has the halach of a high level of tahara ability to be used for both anida and for spring water. Now, what happens further? So here we have a machlokes. According to the first opinion, it'll only be kosher for anida because it'll be mikvah water, not spring water. It'll have mikvah water mixed into it. That means there'll be rainwater mixed in that's not from a spring. And Rav Elazar says, no, from there further it's not going to be kosher, not for nida, not for chatas, because it'll be water flowing down a mountain, which is, it's rainwater, but it's moving rainwater, and therefore that's possible for tefillah, even for nida, and it won't be useful for anything at all. The Gemara continues describing the psukim that Yecheskel describes the nevuah about the river, And the Psukim say further, these waters will go out to the eastern Galil. The Gemara says that refers to the Yam Samchu, the lake of Samchu, which is today the Chula lake in the Chula Valley, which is a lot smaller today than it was in the old days. It used to be one of the 7 Yamim around Eretz Yisrael. It's north of the Kinneret. Pasuk says further, V'yardu al Harava, it'll go down to the Arava, to the plains. That refers to that the stream will reach the Kinneret. Then it says Uva Yam, it'll go down to the sea. That refers to the Yam Melach. Then it says Al Yam Halmutzam, the expanding sea, says the Gemara, that refers to the Great Sea, the oceans, all the oceans of the world, what we call Okeanos, including the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. The Gemara says, why is it called the expanding ocean? The Gemara says it expanded twice. There used to be no Mediterranean Sea, used to be land all the way there, but then the Atlantic came and encroached into the place which is now filled by the water as the Mediterranean Sea in 2 stages. One was in the days of Enosh, and one was into the days of the Dar HaFlaga. Enosh was the grandson of Adam Harishon who turned to Avodah Zarah, and the Dar HaFlaga was when they tried to attack HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the end of Parshas Lech Lecha, near the Parshas Noach, and he dispersed them and broke up their languages. Now, what were these 2 expansions? Machlokes. Gemara says the first pshat is that the first expansion in the days of Enosh was until Calabria in Italy, and the second expansion went all the way to the Barbary coast in North Africa. Second pshat is that the first one went all the way to the Barbary coast, and the second one all the way to the coast of Eretz Yisrael, to Akko and Yafo. Didn't go any further than that. Like there's a pasuk that says in Eov, it says Ad po tava v'lo sosef. You can't go any further than this. Ad Akko, that you could go till Akko, v'lo sosef means and not till Sosef, not till Yafo. Not further than that. Another pasuk that fills it in says Ufoy Yoshes Begoin Galecha, and here your waves will show how great they are. That's till Ufoy, till Yafo. That the waves can go till Yafo, they can't go further than Yafo. Now the Gemara says, why did the river go all the way to these seas? So the Gemara says they understand why they went to the Yam HaMelech and they went to the Yam HaGadol, the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea, and the Great Sea. That's because they're salty and it wanted to make their waters sweet. But why would it have to go to the Yam Kinneret and to the Yam Samchu? They already have fresh water. So Gemara says the reason was to make them have a lot of fish, as the Psukim describe further. Lemina tia degasam, I'll have lots of different types of fish. Lemina mineim tia degasam, many different types of fish. Gemara says Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says even today you can see that there are a lot of different types of fish in one place. I once went to Sidon and he gave me a platter with more than 300 different types of fish. Alright, now the Gemara has a contradiction. The Psukim in Yecheskel further, one says V'nirpu hamayim, the waters will be healed, and then later it says V'lo yerefu lamelach nitanu, it won't be healed, they'll stay salty. Now healed usually means that it becomes not salty. But here it says it'll be healed, and then it says that it will not be healed. Well, which is it? So the Gemara says that the most of the waters will be healed and they'll be not salty anymore, but there will be one place which is called V'lo yerafu, the place called V'lo yerafu, it will be lamelach nitanu, it will be set aside for providing salt to the world. Okay, the Gemara continues with the Psukim, and the Psukim say, that the streams will have on either side trees of all types of trees, its leaf will not dry up, its fruit will not end, and it'll give by its months, l'chadoshav, to its months, plural, it'll give a new crop. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? What is going on over here? So the Gemara says, usually the trees give fruits in twice as much time as the ground gives grain. Grain takes 6 months to grow, and therefore you get 2 crops a year. Fruits take 12 months to grow, you only get 1 crop a year. But when the Mashiach will come, l'asad lavai, it's going to be a lot shorter than that. Grain will grow in 1 month, and trees, which take twice as long, will grow in 2 months. That's what it says, l'chadashav, it'll give a new crop in months, in 2 months it'll give a new crop. You won't have to wait 12 months. So another Gemara says a different shot. The Gemara says no. It's going to be 15 days to grow a crop of grain, and 1 month for a crop of trees. Trees will bear fruit every month. How do you know that? Because in the times of Yoel, there was a nace that the omer, the barley for the carbon omer, grew in 15 days. You see that from the pasuk that says, "Uvenei Tzion gilu v'simchu b'Hashem Elokechem ki nasan lachem es hamor letzedaka veyored lachem geshem moro malkosh barishon." Pasuk describes children of Tzion, be happy in Hashem because He's given you someone to teach you correct behavior, and He brought down rain in the month of Nisan. It brought down the early rain and the late rain, the Yorah and the Malkosh were both brought in the month of Nisan. So you see that the beginning of the season, which is Yorah, and the end of the season, which is the rain called Malkosh, both happened in 1 month, the month of Nisan, and the entire season grew in 15 days in the month of Nisan so that there could be barley for the Karban HaOmer. So Gemara says, so you see the grain once grew miraculously in 15 days. That's what's going to happen in the days of Mashiach. And the fruits will grow twice as long as that. So Gemara says, okay, but then you're saying fruits will only grow in 1 month. Why does it say lachadashav plural? Gemara says it doesn't mean it's going to take multiple months for it to grow. It means it's going to happen multiple times. Every month you'll have a new crop of fruits growing from the trees. Okay, next, the Psukim said that it'll be alav or alehu, its leaves will be letrufa. So letrufa usually means as medicine for healing. So Gemara brings two pshatim here. The Gemara says, first of all, letrufa can mean food, that someone could suck on the leaves and that'll serve as food, or it could really mean healing. And it'll heal two types of things. Rav and Shmuel say two different things. Reb Chanina and Yeshua ben Levi take sides on it. And the ones that it'll heal the mouth. The one says it'll heal the upper mouth, so that people who can't speak will be able to speak, or will you make people be full quickly, or people will be able to eat if they have no appetite. And one will heal the lower mouth, as somebody who is constipated or a woman who is barren will be able to give birth, and that'll be called healing the lower mouth. Okay, now the Gemara has concluded its discussion of that Nevuah of Yecheskel. Now the Gemara mentions briefly about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, having mentioned Yechanya. The Gemara says that Nebuchadnezzar came to attack Eretz Yisrael. He stationed himself in a city called Antioch, which is in modern-day Turkey. Then it was the capital of the Syrian Empire. And members of the Sanhedrin came out to meet him, and they said, what do you plan on doing? You plan on destroying the Beis HaMikdash? What's the deal? So he said, listen, all I want is your king, the one who I appointed and rebelled against me. I want Yechanya. Give him to me, and I'm going to go. So they went back to Yechanya, and they said, look, here's the story. Nebuchadnezzar wants you. So he heard that. He took the keys to the Beis HaMikdash, went up to the roof, and said, Master of the world, we used to be faithful to you, and you gave over the keys. Now we're not faithful. Take the keys back. And there's two versions as to what happened next. Either he threw up the keys and they never came down, or a hand came down from Shemayim and took the keys from him. Either way, it shows that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was agreeing that it was time to end the running of the Beis HaMikdash by Klal Yisrael. Now the Gemara continues and says, when the Chayre Yehuda, the noblemen of Yehuda, saw this, they all went up to the roof and jumped off, and they died, as the pasuk describes in Yeshaya, Masa, Gei, Chizayon, Malacha, Efo, Ki, Alisa, Kulach, Lagagos, Tesuas, Malaya, Ir, Homia, prophecy about the Valley of Vision, which is Yerushalayim. What happened to you now that you all went to the rooftops? You used to be a big city full of commotion, and now you're just slain because you jumped off the roof, and you expired. And that takes us to our next Mishnah, discussing the 13 tables which were in the Beis HaMikdash. And the Mishnah describes them as follows. There were 8 tables made of marble, and they were in the Beis HaMikdash, the place where the karbanos were cut up in the northern part of the Azara. They were made of marble so that they shouldn't get warm and cause the meat to spoil. On them, the karbanos were cut, they were skinned, and all the work that had to be performed was done there. They were also washed. Now, to the west of the ramp up to the Mizbeach were 2 tables. One was marble, one was silver. The marble one had all the Avarim, the pieces of the karbanos, until they were ready to go up in the Mizbeach, till the Kohanim were ready to bring them. And the silver one, which you didn't have to worry about warmth, because the silver one could get hot, the silver one had all the klei shares that were taken out of storage every morning. They were put on those tables until they were needed particularly. Now, more tables were found in the Ulam, that's the entrance hall of the Heichal, the building of the Beis HaMikdash. And those 2 tables served for the Lechem HaPanim. There were 3 tables altogether for the Lechem HaPanim. The one in the Ulam was made out of marble. That is where they put the Lechem HaPanim when it was first baked, when it's first brought in, when it was fresh, it was hot and warm. And they took it from there to the main shulchan, where it was installed in the Beis HaMikdash, the one that was made in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. And they took it from there. When it was taken out to be given to Kohanim, it was brought outside, and then it was put onto the golden table. Now, the reason that it was gold on the way out is because you couldn't have a lesser, cheaper material, because you only go up in Kedusha, and you don't go down. So once the Lechem Panim were used on the shulchan, they couldn't be put on cheaper tables. They had to be put on a gold one. You started with marble because you wanted to stay warm and fresh. So the Gemara describes this. The Gemara brings a brisa which says, no, actually the first table for the Lechem HaPanim was actually silver. So the Gemara says it couldn't be silver because then it would get hot and it would spoil. The Gemara says spoil. What do you mean spoil? Don't we have a brisa that says that the lechem apanim was miraculous. It was baked hot, it was put on the tables hot, and it stayed hot for the entire week that was in the shulchan. The entire week that was displayed in the Beis HaMikdash, it stayed hot and fresh. There was no problem of it being hot and not going to get hot from the table. It was hot from the oven for an entire week, and it definitely wasn't going to spoil. So Gemara says, no, that's a miracle. You can't rely on a miracle. You have to do the best that you can, even assuming that the miracle will stop. We don't want to put it on the table. It's going to make it hot and might spoil it. So Gemara has a question. What happens if you have lechem apanim is missing for a week? They don't manage to make lechem apanim for 1 week. Should you leave the old lechem apanim in the shulchan, or should you take them out and have it to be empty for a week? The problem with the old one is that it's puzzle. Once the lechem apanim's time is ended, you can't leave it longer. Any carbon can't stay past the time. Lechem apanim counts as a carbon. It can't stay for longer. It's going to be upsol. It's going to be noiser. So Gemara says, well, it does say lechem apanim lefanai tamid. It has to be there always. Always has to be something there. Even if it's puzzle, you should leave it there. Okay, now the Gemara discusses the shulchan made by Shlomo Melech. So there were 10 shulchanos, 10 display shulchanos for the lechem apanim that were made by Shlomo HaMelech, and they were put in the Beis HaMikdash. And Pasuk says, Vayash shulchanos asar, made 10 shulchans, Vayanach beheichal chamishim yamin, chamishim mismal. He put them 5 on the left and 5 on the right. So Gemara assumes 5 on the left, 5 on the right means when you come in the door of the heichal, which is on the east side, so 5 on the left, 5 on the right means 5 on the north and 5 on the south. So Gemara asks, how can you have any on the south? Shulchan has to be on the north. That's a rule. Pasuk says explicitly it has to be on the north. So Gemara says, no, all 10 were on the north. When it says 5 on the left and 5 on the right, it means 5 on the left and 5 on the right of Moshe Rabbeinu's shulchan. There were 11 shulchanos altogether. Moshe's was in the middle, and 5 on the left of that and 5 on the right were all on the north, just 5 to the east and 5 to the west. So Gemara says that the lechem apanim was only put on the one of Moshe Rabbeinu, or there's a machlokes about this. Rabbi Yosi ben Rabbi Yehuda says no, there was lechem apanim on all the tables. All 10 tables, all 11 tables had a lechem apanim of their own. Now the Gemara discussed how it was arrayed. So Gemara brings a brisa that quotes a machlokes is how it was set up. The first opinion is Rabbi, who says that the 10 tables, the 11 tables, were set up end to end along the northern wall of the Beis HaMikdash, and they just fit. Rabbi Shimon says, though, they were placed north to south along the western wall. So Gemara says north to south along the western wall, end to end. That means that the last 5 are on the southern half. They are south of the entrance to the heichal. How can you have them in the south? So the Gemara leaves that question unanswered. It doesn't.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.